The great home care consultant Stephen Tweed told me that somebody asked if he was retiring and he said, "No, I am rewiring." Stephen has now jumped into figuring out the best way to handle artificial intelligence in the flows of home care. He's identified deep thinking here regarding how to look at the big systems that we use to run home care agencies and figure out how we could use artificial intelligence to improve our productivity. This is a really interesting listen.
Welcome to the Home Care Heroes and Day Service Stars podcast. If you provide services to keep older or disabled people living at home, then this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Ken Accardi.
So welcome to the next installment of the Home Care Heroes podcast. We have a young man here named Stephen Tweed, who actually has been related to the industry of healthcare at home for 40 years. And for 25 of those years, he's led a team called Leading Home Care. And pretty much everybody in the industry knows Stephen. He put in motion in 2013 something called the Home Care CEO Forum. And he is a top industry researcher. I actually have learned a lot from Stephen over the years and used a lot of his metric systems. For example, we took the 12-point system that Stephen put in place for the best and most important metrics a home care agency should measure that came out of actually one of the CEO forum groups. And we made sure that we could answer all those questions with metrics in our own software at Ankota. And so we're very privileged to have Stephen. But, as this young man who's been in the industry for a while, we're actually going to talk about a very relevant and timely topic, which is artificial intelligence. So Stephen has actually stepped out of doing the direct home care forums, but he's doubled down on research, and he said he's not retiring, he's rewiring. He's figuring out new ways of doing things, and he has really dived, or I'm not sure the word, but he's jumped in with both feet into artificial intelligence. We'll use that terminology. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So first of all, welcome, Stephen, and thanks for being on Home Care Heroes.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be with you and your audience and talk about things that are mutually interesting. And as we've agreed over the years, there's lots of fascinating stuff going on in home care.
Fantastic. Well, one thing that you said, we were just talking a little bit before the meeting, that you've really found that artificial intelligence can help home care agencies on 3 levels. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. As I've been looking and studying and trying to get a grasp, I came across a wonderful book by a university professor from the University of California at Berkeley, and his name is Sangeet Paul Chaudhary, Chaudary, and his book is called Reshuffle. And he was talking in the book about how AI and technology are reshuffling major corporations. And I was intrigued by it because what I learned is you don't need to be a technical guru or a geek to understand the principles of how you apply AI to a business organization. And as a 40-year business strategist in healthcare at home, I've always been looking for new insights into how leaders develop and implement strategies to grow their business, to gain competitive advantage, to differentiate themselves in the market, and to fulfill their vision of what it is that they want to become. So as I was reading Chaudhary's book, Reshuffle, he made it very clear that AI really fits into an organization, and in my case, I'm applying it to home care at 3 different levels. The first is individual tasks. And in home care, there are lots of people in home care companies doing individual tasks, whether it's recruiting caregivers or retaining caregivers or scheduling clients and caregivers, or whether it's doing sales and marketing activities or even billing and collections. There are individual workers performing individual tasks, and AI can improve the speed, reduce time, save costs for those individual doing those tasks. And Ken, I know you'll appreciate this. One of the real insights that came out of all of my work in studying this is getting a clear understanding that, at least in the foreseeable future, AI is not replacing people. It is making them more effective, more efficient, reducing time, saving money. the people will still need to be there. Now, what somebody said to me is AI won't replace people, but people using AI will replace other people. And so I think one of the lessons for your listeners is to be thinking about how do we use AI in our company and how do we help our team members be more efficient, more effective by using AI. So that's at the task level. The second level is organizational systems. And you and I talked about this offline and about the work that we've been doing around systems. And coming out of the top 5% CEO mastermind group over the last decade is the lesson that leaders of large home care organizations are systems thinkers. They think in the context, if there's a task that we do every day, we need to have a system. And a system is a combination of process and people. So there's a step-by-step process that we do over and over and over again. And there's the people who have the skills and the discipline to apply that process step by step over and over and over again. So we get consistency and repetition so that we do it the same way every time. And so within a small home care company, a scheduler is going to have a process where they're doing scheduling the same way every time. But when you grow that company and it has 2 locations or 4 locations or 25 locations, the concept is that you're doing that same task the same way or that same system the same way in all of your locations. And so years ago, I identified what I call the 5 phases of flow of a home care company. So every client that works with a home care company goes through these 5 phases. The first phase is the attraction phase, and that's sales and marketing and SEO and social media and all the things we do to attract new clients. Then the second phase is the conversion phase, and that's where we convert callers to clients, or we convert leads and inquiries into a client that's receiving care. The third phase is the staffing phase, and that's caregiver recruiting and retention and onboarding and training and development and all the things that we do around our caregivers. The fourth phase is I call the caregiving phase, and this is where we do scheduling, we do care coordination, we do time and attendance reconciliation, EVV, all the things that you do to make sure that people are actually there on the job doing the things they're supposed to do. And then the fifth phase is collection phase. It's billing, collections, financial reporting, all of the things that happen at the back end of that process. And so for years, we've been working with those 5 phases of flow. So when we started thinking about systems, we took each of the phases and broke them down. And so we identified 12 specific systems that a high-performing home care company needs to have in place. And obviously, not every company has all the systems in place all the time, but it's what we work toward. So we have a sales system, we have a marketing system, we have a conversion system, we have a recruiting system, we have a retention system, we have a care coordination system, we have a scheduling system, we have a billing system, we have a collection system, we have a reporting system. And so then we look at AI in the context of how does this new technology help us improve those systems. And it goes back to you remember the old continuous improvement principles from years ago. How do we use AI to continuously improve our systems inside the company to increase performance and reliability across the company? And then the third level we talked about is what Chaudhary calls the competitive ecosystem. How will AI help organizations restructure in a way that makes them more competitive in the marketplace? They restructure the way they do business to create strategic market advantage. And I think that's the exciting opportunity down the road. It's going to be a while before companies in home care are able to get to that level, but it's clear that AI has the potential to totally reshape the home care competitive ecosystem. So tasks, organizational systems, competitive ecosystem, those are the way AI is going to evolve and develop in home care. Lots of opportunities, long way to go till we get there. So That's sort of a long answer to your short question. No.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great rundown. So just to recap it again, so we are going to look at 3 levels: tasks, and we're going to look at systems, and then we're going to look at really how we could make a competitive advantage in so many different ways. So I think that's great. So let's start for the folks who, I think that if we spoke about AI even 2, 3 years ago, that the first answer you might have heard was, hey, we are a personal relationship, hands-on business where we send caregivers to homes to take care of older folks who don't really think about technology. And I think that that's totally changed. And so let's kind of stick on the task level for a minute. So what are a few of the tasks that you've seen agencies just really getting a lot of productivity out of using, whether it's ChatGPT or whichever AI they use to streamline those tasks? What are some of the low-hanging fruit for the folks who are still ready to dip their toe?
Well, I think the 3 big areas that tasks fall into that can be improved through AI are sales and marketing, and we have them as 2 separate systems, but the whole client attraction area. Second is caregiver recruiting, and then also caregiver retention. And then the third area is going to be scheduling and care coordination. And of course, with your software, a lot of what you do is about that whole element of the business of how you match clients and caregivers and how you schedule them and how do you reconcile all of the things that couldn't happen or could go wrong on a day-to-day operations. And so let's take a recruiter in a home care company. What we know is that most home care companies are spending a lot of their time in recruiting online. And the data from Home Care Pulse and Activated Insights show over the last 15 years that the number one online recruiting source is Indeed.com. And yet what we also know from their data is that the recruiting source with the highest turnover is Indeed.com.
Exactly.
And the recruiting source with the lowest turnover and the highest quality applicants is employee referral systems. But many companies don't put a lot of emphasis in their employee referral system because it's easier to get lots of applicants with online. So then we step back and we look at how do we use AI to improve our online recruiting, and how do we use AI to improve our employee referral program for recruiting. And then we can look at other areas of recruiting, in-person, face-to-face recruiting in the community or campus recruiting. So what can an individual recruiter inside of a home care company do with AI to improve digital recruiting, to improve employee referral programs, and to improve face-to-face recruiting? And now you start to get lots of ideas, and you start putting some of those things into ChatGPT or Perplexity or one of the other platforms, and you begin to get ideas and information. And part of, I think, the understanding that people in home care need to grasp is that what AI does is look at lots of data and information and quickly analyzes it and synthesizes it and gives you answers more quickly than a human being can do it wading through the data. And I'll give you a classic example of that. I was at this symposium the other day put on by the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and a group of physicians were presenting how they're using AI in medicine. And this is a pretty scary number, but this is what they told us. They said only 34% of physician interactions where the physician prescribes a medication or a therapy, only 34% is based on actual medical knowledge. So 66% is based on something else. And I'm trying to wrap my head around what is that something else. But they said this physician has 3 sources of information: medical journals, medical textbooks in classroom learning. And with all the stuff out there, my family physician doesn't have the time or the capacity to read and remember all the things that are in the medical journals and medical textbooks. And so my doctor is recommending what worked the last time, or what a pharmaceutical rep told him works, or what his colleague in the practice is trying that works. And so much of it is trial and error, and only a small percentage of it is based on actual medical knowledge. And so if we apply that to the home care space and we say, well, what about scheduling and matching clients and caregivers? How much of what we do is based on actual information and knowledge about the client and about the caregiver and about distance from one place to another and about traffic and all of the pieces of information that will affect that schedule working, and how much of it is sort of intuitive?
Hmm.
And we see the same thing in recruiting, where the recruiter often hires caregivers based on intuition rather than good data, because getting the data takes too much time. And so they hire the people they like rather than the people that have a demonstrated ability to be good caregivers and to be reliable and have consistency of care. So those are some specific examples of tasks within a home care company that can be improved through the application of one of the online AI platforms that are readily available.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's great. And I do think that from my perspective, I use a lot of AI for a lot of things. I would say that ChatGPT is probably the most accessible and the main brand name that most people know. And I will say it's probably the best conversationalist. A couple things I really like about it is that you could click the microphone and you could talk into it. You could take a break. You could click the microphone again. And so it's very conversational. You can run it on your phone and speak to it. Whereas, for example, Claude AI, which is what I use mostly for writing software, you kind of have to type a little bit more and things like that. But for example, Claude is a much better writer than ChatGPT and things like that. So I'll ask ChatGPT to strategize things, and then I'll ask Claude to do the final writing, and then I might even proofread it with Gemini. And when it's going on the web, Gemini has the best image generator, which is called Nano Banana of all names. So you could go in there and say, hey, I wrote this piece that's going to be part of our marketing, and could you read it and pose 2 images that you could put together for us using Nano Banana? And you could literally just ask that question and it'll say, okay, well, here's the recommendations. And then you could ask it to create those images and it'll create beautiful images. So I think that there's a lot of things out there and everybody has to dip their toes. I would say if you haven't tried anything yet, the first 2 things I might recommend are start with your ideas of a new job description and ask the AI to make it a fantastic job description. And, maybe say something like, I heard Nick Bonatotopoulos talking about making the job description be like an irresistible offer for a caregiver to want to come to the company. How can I do that? And you could ask the AI and it'll write it in an amazing way. And like I said, then another one would be if you have a new state regulation and you need to get that into your policies and procedures, you could just give your policies and procedures to ChatGPT. It'll read the whole thing. And you could say, hey, these are the changes that are coming from my state. You could give it a link to that web page and say, these are the new things coming down the road. How would you recommend that I incorporate these into our policies and procedures? And things like that are everyday kind of tasks that you might not think that the AI could help you with, but they could do a fantastic job. So that's really, really great. And then, Stephen, of course, you went down the path of the different systems, whether it be in, like I love the way that you break it down. We have the attracting, the converting clients, the staffing, and that's of course recruiting and retention and all these different pieces. And you could ask AI to do a lot of work. I guess one thing I'll say as well is that AI has gotten so much smarter in the last, let's say, year or even 6 months in what you're able to do. And it used to be that, you would maybe give it a spreadsheet and it couldn't understand it, but now you could give it a pretty big spreadsheet and you could give it, um, not too much guidance, and it'll, help you understand, okay, well, what could you determine about my clients who aren't paying, or if you are, let's say, being reimbursed by Medicaid, what can you figure out about, where I should focus on trying to improve my collection. So there's so many things that you can do there. And it's interesting that you made the analogy with physicians. I feel like there have been attempts for a very, very long time for physicians to use artificial intelligence. And I think maybe one of the early uh, issues that came up, maybe I'd even go as far as to say it's an error, is the first thing that people tried to solve with AI in medicine was diagnosis, diagnosing the problem. And that might be the hardest problem out there. Whereas today, I would say most physicians now are able to speak their notes in and record their conversations, and not just get a transcript, but get a very, very nice, concise record of what you've talked about. And everybody's using the AI more and more. I think we're the first software with Ankota where we actually have the capability where the caregiver can look at their task list, then they could just speak their notes for the visit. They could just read down their task list and say, I did this, I prepared the lunch, this is what we had for lunch. Mrs. Johnson had some tomatoes from her garden and we incorporated those. And as far as her bath today, she wanted a shower. I set that up for her. I observed by the door. And so what you're getting from that is you're just speaking in. It takes you less time than it would to click each task that you did. But in addition to that, you're getting all that extra information about what happened. And that's something that the agency can share with the family. And it also, just gives you more color commentary on what's going on. So I do think that it's really, having a big impact, and I'm excited to hear what you're doing in, all the areas. So I guess we've done a deep dive now into tasks. Let's talk about, again, you've outlined the systems. You talked about how the 5, major flows break into 12 processes. So, kind of tell me about the work that you're doing, and maybe take just one of those processes and, talk about when we take, or I'm sorry, the systems, and then we try to turn that into things that processes and people are going to do on a daily basis. Is the AI being used mostly to, ask how we can improve that process, or how we can, automate that process? Like, what are some of the findings that you've had there?
Well, as we move forward, it's going to really be about how we automate those processes so that on an ongoing basis, the AI platform is looking at information in real time and constantly updating and learning and growing. And so, as you said, 6 months ago, AI made lots of errors and we didn't trust it. Now it's getting better and better because it's learning from the data that we put in and the results that we get. And so, as you were talking, I'm thinking about, okay, what would be a simple system that any home care company could begin to think about? Um, and if we start at the beginning with sales, one of the things that I've been doing with a number of companies is talking with them about selling home care to your ideal client. And so, how do you find your ideal client? Well, in any home care company, the ideal client is based on the referral partner that brings you the largest number of new clients, that bring you the largest number of hours per week and the longest length of stay. And you do the math, and you're in this all the time, Ken. You know that from an operating effectiveness point of view, it's much more effective to have one client that has high hours per week and is with you for a year or 2 years or 3 years than it is to be constantly churning clients with 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, or 4 hours a day, 2 days a week, and trying to match caregivers and all of the issues. And so we look at a system that regularly gathers admission information and discharge information from our clients, and look at who are the clients that have the highest hours per week and the longest length of stay, and how did we come by them? Who are the referral partners? Did they come from online? Did they come from a hospital discharge planner? Did they come from a bank trust officer or an estate attorney? And so by looking at analyzing that data very quickly, we can send information to the sales rep that says the highest potential for you and how you spend your day is to go out there and identify what we call the trusted advisors, the bank trust officers, the geriatric care managers, the estate attorneys, because our data show that those are the referral partners that bring us the highest hours per week and the longest length of stay. And so constantly analyzing that data, and now we can drill down not only to the category of referral partner, but to the individual organizations and facilities where those people live and work. So that's an example of how we take a task and we then look at a whole system for selling. We look at the same thing in the context of marketing. The data, most recent data that we have from our research suggests that the number one application for AI and systems will be client and caregiver matching and scheduling. And there's a whole bunch of elements to that, as you know, from the work that you do. And so how do we build an operating system, a platform that uses the capability of AI to take a client who has a particular want and need and a caregiver that has particular wants and needs and match them up and make sure that that client and that caregiver are together as often as possible. Our data earlier, many years ago, began to identify that what clients want from a home care company are, number one, quality care, whatever that means, but that's what they will tell you. And it basically means that the caregiver is there helping them with quality of life and independence in the home. So quality of care they want. Secondly, they want reliability. They want a caregiver that shows up every day as scheduled on time. And they want continuity of care. They want the same caregiver every time they have a caregiver. And so how do we use AI to do that match so that the client and the caregiver are together every shift that the company provides? Now, obviously, it's easier to do that if you have a large number of clients with high hours per week and you have a large number of caregivers that have high hours per week. I talked to you earlier about the rule of threes, and we've identified three types of caregivers in home care. The first is the full-time professional caregiver. That's somebody that's going to do this work. They're committed to being a caregiver. They love their work. They want to do it 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week. And the only difference is which agency they work for. They're going to do this work. So is it for your agency or somebody else? The second category is what I call the half-time professional caregiver. Those are committed professional caregivers, but they don't want to work 40 hours a week. They want to work 20 hours or 25 hours. And many of those half-time professionals are in a second career. They're retired school teachers, they're retired police officers, they're retired paramedics or first responders, or they're stay-at-home moms that have little kids and they want to put them on the school bus at 9:00 in the morning and then I want to pick them up at 2:30, but they'll work a 4-hour shift in between. And so we have the full-time professional caregivers, the half-time professional, and then the third are what I call the part-time intermittent caregivers. They work when they want to work, they work when they're available, and they're the ones that disrupt the scheduling process because you can't always count them. They're the ones that are more likely to call off. They're the ones that when you call them up, say, your availability shows that you can work on Thursday from 10 to 2. I have a shift for it. No, I can't do it. My kid's got a thing at school. So they're part-time, intermittent, they're hard. And so using AI to really fine-tune that process. And then we get into the whole thing, and I don't know how much you've looked at in this, but there's generative AI and then there's agents AI, where the AI actually becomes an agent. And so what we see coming down the road in that scheduling system is where the software actually sends a message to the caregiver and says, you said you wanted to work Thursdays and we have a shift on Thursday. What's your availability? And it sends it out to 10 caregivers and 3 of them come back saying they're available. Now the human can look at that data and look at the match information from the software and then make a human decision. I'm going to put this client with this caregiver and I'm going to communicate with them both so that they know what's coming up on Thursday. So those are the kinds of things that we're already seeing some companies doing in their organizational systems. We have a long way to go. There's huge amounts of opportunity, but we're also already seeing some specific examples of how companies are improving their systems. And what we've learned is you can't do all 12 systems at one time. So you have to focus. So it is your scheduling system, it is your sales system, it is your recruiting system that you're going to focus on. And how do I use technology and AI to improve that system?
Perfect. I love it. Yeah, I actually listened to a fantastic podcast in our industry, the Miriam Allred podcast, which is now called the Home Care Strategy Lab. And she recently interviewed the CEO of a new company called Phoebe. And Phoebe is actually looking to solve some of those scheduling problems. So one thing that they drill in on is that when you get that cancellation of a caregiver for a shift 90 minutes before that shift, in general, you might have to call 11 to 14 people in order to try to fill that shift. And so what the Phoebe AI is able to do is to first try to text people and then actually make phone calls where the caregiver is talking to AI, not only trying to fill that shift, but also really trying to take that caregiver's wants and needs to the next level, right? So they're asking that person, hey, are you okay with dogs? Well, I'm okay with little dogs. I'm not okay with bigger dogs. And they're able to, use the AI to literally create ways of storing data about a caregiver that was never there before, and then have that in its data bank so it knows that the next time I'm trying to fill a shift, that fact might, help us a little bit further. And so really, I mean, that's great. And I think that I think that company raised $9 million and they're off to the races, doing that, and they're having an impact. And so I do think that we're going to see a lot of things where, if we looked at what home care was from a system perspective, even 5 years ago, there are a lot of things that, weren't everyday software back at that time. And, some of them maybe are not AI, but like things like the micro caregiver rewards platforms are new, and things like Phoebe with scheduling are new. And then there's dedicated recruiting platforms. And, and this one, it wouldn't be AI, but there's, a company out there that has a live chat component on your website. So when somebody's looking for home care at 10 o'clock at night, when they're able to have gotten their kids to bed, they could actually speak to a live person about that agency, or a caregiver can speak there. So I do think that there's a lot of innovation coming in a lot of different ways. And I think that the work that you, Stephen, are doing, drilling into these business systems and then, really looking at the data and finding out, where the opportunities are. So really find your ideal customer profile and dig into that. And here's how you could change your processes to make sure that you're spending the right amount of time on those top referral sources and not as much time in other referral sources. That's a great use of AI. Or, taking something like, hey, the scheduler was going to work on improvements or recruiting, and the next thing they have to go fill that shift, and they're just going to be on the phone for an hour and a half trying to get that shift filled, and having AI help with that. These are really, really great solutions that are going to be coming down the pike. And I do think we really have to think differently. I mean, I don't want to go too crazy with this, but there was this guy named Elon Musk out there who said, hey, we could combine AI and battery technology with automotive, and now we have self-driving Teslas that are working pretty well. And his next thing is he's trying to figure out how we could put data centers in outer space. I mean, he just merged SpaceX and X.AI so he can start using data centers that are actually available as satellites, and taking solar energy as its nuclear power plant to power those AI things. So So we're not going to come up with those things probably in home care, but I do think that if we think about, converging things that weren't there in the past, that we're going to come up with some great new things. So one thing my company is working on is we have a combination of an AI companion and emergency response. So basically, just using the ability for an older person to speak to the AI and have conversations with it, but also have an emergency response button where the AI will respond first and see if it can help out. And while it's, doing this, it's also, listening in, but it's not spying on the person. We've worked really hard to say, hey, if grandma wants to have, I can't think of good examples for this, but if grandma wants to have a boyfriend, or if she wants to have, that shot of Bailey's before she goes to bed, that's her personal business. But, if she's talking about, um, not feeling well, or somebody who called up and was asking about her bank account or things like that, those are things that we would actually escalate to the home care agency and the family. And so we are really just trying to think in different ways. I like what Phoebe's doing, and I like, all of this innovation. And I think that um, probably the best thing we could do in home care now is really just think out of the box of new and different ways that we can approach our problems, because I really think we're the most important industry for the next 20 years in the country, with, with the population that we have and the population growth that we have, and figuring out how to do things with, fewer caregivers. We're going to have to, there's no worry about job security in home care. The problem in home care is nothing to do with job security. It's how do we make sure that we could be as productive as possible, because there's a lot of people that we can provide a lot of care and a lot of help to. So, Stephen, I mean, it's kind of funny. We just started. I asked you the first question. You went on for a great amount of time, but we've actually, been here for a pretty long time already. And I think, again, there's some amazing nuggets, and you covered a lot of the, the great things that you've always reminded us in the past, the different types of caregivers, the main processes and systems, and those types of things. So we really, we're rooting for you to find, great solutions for us and to point us in the right direction, find those great opportunities. I guess, do you have like one last story to tell, or anything that you want to do to put a capstone on this episode today?
Yeah, you were talking a little bit about the different technology, and about listening in to the client at the home, and sorting out what the technology hears to protect their privacy. And that's one of the things that I've observed over the last decade. Is I've probably had 100 conversations with founders of new companies that were looking at using technology to transform home care. And a lot of it had to do with various sensors, cameras, motion detectors, audio recording, all of those kinds of things. And very few of them, if any of them, have gotten significant traction in the industry. And the big reason is that the clients resist the technology because they want to protect their privacy. And I remember years ago, I was visiting with my grandmother, who was in a assisted living facility, and I was speaking at a conference of senior living communities, and said to my grandmother, "Gram, I'm speaking to this conference next week. What should I tell them that's most important from your perspective as a resident of this facility?" And she thought for a moment, and she said, "Don't shout. I'm not deaf."
Hmm.
And her pattern was that people would come into the room and they would speak loudly to her because they thought she couldn't hear.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one she said is, "Respect my privacy. This is my home, and it's my private domain, and so knock when you enter, be respectful." And that really struck with me. That's probably 25 years ago that we had that conversation. And it stuck with me, and it resonated in the context of how we apply AI technology, in that we need to understand the needs of the client, the patient, the resident, and we don't need to speak loud because they're not deaf. And so being sensitive to those kinds of issues. But then the other big one was this privacy issue that we talked about a moment ago. And so I think for home care owners and leaders and for people supporting the home care industry in looking at this question of how do we apply AI, I think it's how do we get the technology to do tasks, to operate systems, or to translate competitive advantage in such a way that it respects the needs and wants of the client, and it respects their privacy or the need and want for privacy. And that seems like two simple things, but I think we find that those are some of the big challenges as we go forward. And so, as you said, leaders in home care and leaders of companies that support home care need to be thinking differently in the context of how do we use this new technology, and recognizing that the technology is changing every day, that AI is constantly learning from the information that's available to it. And so the answer you get next week will be different than the answer you get this week, maybe to the same question. And so we need to be learning and growing and applying AI in new and different ways to transform the home care system and the competitive ecosystem. And I think it's an exciting time, and folks like you are that are in the technology aspect of home care have lots of opportunity to make a difference for your clients and the individuals within your client organizations to be able to apply some of these things to serve their clients and serve their caregivers and serve their community. So I know that was a long answer to a short question, but we've got so much to talk about. So thank you.
No, that's okay. Yeah, thank you. And so, Stephen, thank you for being so gracious and sharing your knowledge, and as you've always done for at least the 10 years that I've known you, and that kind of thing, and for being here today. But you do also have a business, and you do some private consulting and things like that. So if folks wanted to get in touch with you and get in touch with your research and that kind of thing today, how would they do that?
Well, my company is called Leading Home Care, a Tweed Jeffries company. My wife and business partner, Elizabeth Jeffries, is the partner in our parent company, Tweed Jeffries LLC. And so Leading Home Care is our practice that focuses on the home care space. The website is leadinghomecare.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can subscribe to my weekly newsletter called Stephen Tweed's Thursday Thoughts that comes out every Thursday. You can go to leadinghomecare.com, and there's a spot there to just put in your email. That's all we need. You don't have to give us a bunch of information, and we're not going to spam you or call you or bug you. We're just going to send out the newsletter every Thursday morning at 7 a.m. Folks want to have a conversation, they're always able to reach out. My email is Stephen with a PH at leadinghomecare.com, STEPHEN at leadinghomecare.com. I'm always open to hearing from folks, having a conversation, and if I can help you, I'd love to. And if not, I may be able to find someone who can. So that's what we do, and we're having fun with it, and appreciate all you're doing with your team and the technology that you're putting out there to help companies.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stephen Tweed, for being here on Home Care Heroes and Day Service Stars. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on the Home Care Heroes and Day Service Stars podcast, produced by Ankota. You can listen to back episodes by visiting 4homecareheroes.com. That's the number 4, then the words homecareheroes.com.